Hello everyone. In today's tutorial, we are going to cover the concept of rotoscoping. Rotoscoping is the technique we use in order to create masks or mats through which we extract or subtract objects or characters out of a flat piece of film or video in order to create a layering effect through which we can place items in between that object that we subtracted and the background. So if you have titles that go behind a subject or an object on a film, that's probably the technique that was used for this. Now, most animators and most motion graphic designers shy away from using it because it's time consuming and it's tedious, but it is an essential part of any animation workflow up to today. So with this in mind, this is changing slightly, by the way, with the new AI techniques and plugins that are coming into the market. It's changing where we are using now more CPU powered in order to do the work for us than actually doing hand-drawn animation. That's where we find ourselves today, sort of in that middle, in that mix. So let's go ahead and get started with this. What I'm going to use today I'm just simply going to use a piece of film, piece of video, and this video is 1920 by 1080. By the way, the technique that I'm about to show you works best if you work with the video at full size, basically at full resolution. So make sure that you maintain the full resolution of the video when you create your projects. Also, make sure that you have enough contrast between the subject that you are working with and the background you're trying to pull it from. So let me go ahead and drag this video onto the icon here to create a composition with it, and you'll notice that it comes in as half size. If I go full size, basically the thing's going to be at 1920 by 1080, which makes it gigantic for our screens. So what we want to do now is we want to create what we call roto brush. Before we do this, let me undo this step really quick, and I am going to double click the footage and I am going to trim it in order to be able to just utilize the portion of the video that I want to use, which is from 0 seconds all the way to about 13 seconds. So if I place that there and I trim, I am getting this to be about 13 seconds, and I'm looking at my timer down here and my empty code, and it tells me that's about 13 seconds. And with that, we can go ahead and create a new composition. So I'm just going to go ahead and drag it now into the composition window, and then I get my 13-second composition with the size and the resolution of the actual file. So with this in mind, what we want to do is we want to go ahead and mask her out so that I can place a title behind her and the grass and the background. So to do that, I am going to double click the layer to open up its layer window. And now in that layer window is where I will be utilizing the rotoscope brush. You find that roto brush up here. This is the tool. Now there's two tools underneath that tool drop down. One is the roto brush and the other one is the refine edge tool. We're going to be using both. So let's start with the roto brush. The roto brush is a fairly simple tool to use. All it does for us is basically designates an area within the film or video sorry, that you're going to be extracting from the actual background. The way this works is by you telling the program by where you paint what you want extracted. This is where having high contrast between your background and your foreground comes in handy. So in this case, the girl has a white dress that is highly contrasty against the dark green of the background here. Or we might run into an issue with her hair because the sun is right on top of her hair. So there might be a bit of an issue there, and that's where the other tool comes in, the refine edge tool. So let's start with the rotobrush tool. With the rotobrush tool selected, you just simply need to draw in the area, inside the area that you want to be selected. Notice that I'm not going for edge or anything like that. I'm simply touching whatever areas I want to be masked out. So if you notice, I get the actual outline. You see that little pink outline? That outline is basically the mask that I will be working with. You'll notice also that my mouse has a plus sign in it, which indicates that if I keep on clicking in certain areas, I will keep on adding, as I just did over here at the front of the dress. If I want to grab some more of those details around the hair, I can go ahead and do that, and you'll notice that it expands my selection. Now let's, for example, make a mistake. Say I clicked here, for example. you will notice that it tried to capture this whole area in front of the face and the grass. If I need to delete, or if by mistake you capture more than you needed, all you need to do is press the command, the Alt key on the keyboard, and then you can notice that it changes to a red minus on the cursor, which means that you're subtracting from the mask that you are creating. Now you'll notice that as soon as I click there and drag in that area, it'll start refining my mask until I get it to a place where I'm happy with it. Now you will also notice that I want to probably get this front of the hair right here. You will also notice that I have I didn't get the stem of the flower, nor the top of the dandelion, nor the bottom of the stem. So if I want to capture that, if I were to use this big pen that I'm using right now, I would have a problem because I would be capturing some of the green in this area outside. So that would be time wasted. So what I want to do is I want to reduce the size of my brush. To do that, you press the Control or the Command key when you click, and you move up or down in order to increase or decrease the size of the brush. Once you get to a brush size that is comfortable for what you're trying to mask, go ahead and draw a little bit on it. And I actually did on the side, so I'm going to undo a little bit. Just going to capture this area here. And it gets a little tricky when you're trying to get to those points, but you can always go ahead and remove the areas that you don't need. Let me go ahead and add this area down here as well. So I'll just go ahead and create that stem and finesse by removing this area behind the stem. And then I'll also draw on top of the dandelion. So you notice that I have pretty much an outline of everything that I want. Now, if you want to get really picky, you can zoom in and move around and finesse your selection as much as you can. Okay, and for that, you can spend a lot of time doing that. But what we really want to do is utilize the tools that we have at our disposal. So for that, we're going to be using the, let me make sure that I'm seeing this at resolution full. There it is. Need to make sure that my resolution is at full so that I get the most detail possible. So you do that under View, Resolution Full. And I'm going to switch tools now. Now, what does this mask do? What does it look like? What am I truly creating? If I switch my view here to the alpha channel, you'll notice that basically I'm creating an alpha channel where I am masking out the girl. Anything in the background becomes transparent and she becomes opaque because of the white. Now, you'll notice that there's not a lot of detail in what I'm masking. And for most techniques, for most rotoscoping processes that we will ever work with, this will be good enough. Some others require frame by frame animation, and you will notice that when you start seeing halos or when you start seeing ghosts behind what you're masking. So let me go ahead and switch back. This also gives us a view like the quick mask in Photoshop, as you can see. Let me go ahead and switch back to my outline, the little purplish outline, and I'm going to switch my tool from the rotoscope tool, the rotobrush, to the refine edge tool. Now the refine edge tool works the same way when increasing the size. So if I click and drag up, if I press Control and then click and drag up, once again, press Control and then click and drag up or down, you're resizing the brush size. Now, let's say, for example, I want to include some of this hair that's hanging behind her back here, and maybe some of these little hairs on this side. That's what the refine brush does. So you'll notice that when I click on this, and I'm going to go around hair area, I'm probably going to stop right there. You'll notice that once it stops thinking, it creates kind of a matte that allows me to increase or decrease the amount of selection. Those items that are dark will become transparent. Those items that are light become opaque. So whatever you see white, that becomes completely opaque. Whatever you see gray is semi-transparent, and whatever you see black is going to become completely transparent. Just like any mask in Photoshop or any digital imaging program. Now, if you don't like the X-ray look of this, then you can turn that off from here, from this swatch right here. So if you turn that off, now you see almost like a quick mask would look like in Photoshop. And that's, some people prefer to work this way. Some others prefer to keep it this way so they actually see what is going on with the mask. You will also notice that when I did this, I got a little bar underneath my timeline here in the layer window. This bar indicates the amount of frames that will be track matted. So right now I am track matting all 13 seconds, which will probably take, I'm not track mat, sorry, rotoscope. All 13 seconds rotoscoping can take quite a while to do. Usually when you're rotoscoping, you want to hone in on the area that you want to, the time that you want to be transparent. So with that in mind, let me go ahead and delete that effect. And I'm going to go back to my composition and I'm going to start from scratch. This time, however, I'm going to hone in on the time that I want to rotoscope. So let me duplicate that layer, Command D, and I'm going to scrub my video until I find the spot where I want to actually create the rotoscoping. So I want to start around 1 second and I want to be done by about 4 seconds. So I just want, out of the 13 seconds, I want these 3 seconds to be what I rotoscope. So let me go ahead and trim this layer from 1 to 4 seconds. And I am going to double click that layer in order to rotoscope just that area, just what I have here. And so technique is the same. I'm going to go switch my tool again to the roto brush and I'm going to draw on the area that I want rotoscoped. I am going to include the hands. I'm going to make the size of this slightly smaller and include the hands. I am going to go back to the hair and I am going to back to this area here in the front, down the lion, and maybe the stem down here. Let's zoom in a little bit. Use my hand tool by pressing the space bar and resize my brush to just fit that stem. And it should cover pretty much all that's there. And then I'm going to remove this area here. I don't want that area there. So remember to remove, to subtract, you press the Alt key or the Command key on the Mac. So with that, not the Command key, the Option key on the Mac. So I'm going to refine the hair once again. So I'm going to switch my tool again to refine edge. And I am going now to increase the size of the brush to include this whole area here of the hair. Okay. It might have been a bit too big, but I am okay with that. Let me undo that really quick and I'm going to resize the brush to make it slightly smaller. So about that size. And just to be a little bit more detailed, I want to get some of these hairs that are flying around in the background. And it's a bit difficult to solve this area here because definitely you have a really bright sun and she is blonde and you have the light going through the hair. So it's a little bit difficult, but as you can see, the solver actually does a pretty good job of masking it out. So with that done, I got my mask, and what I want to do is you'll notice now that this bar down here extends beyond what I need and before what I need, but it doesn't go all the way to 13 seconds, which is going to make my rendering a little bit faster. That said, you can go ahead and roll over the edge of that bar and reduce it or increase it as needed in order to be able to extend the amount of rotoscoping that you do on this particular video. So with that done, what you want to do is one of two things. You can either step through this 1 frame at a time, and that would be by pressing the page down key if you want to. You can press the space bar and have the whole thing play out and mask out as it goes. Or you can move your playback head from this point to the end and it will start rendering each one of the frames independently. Either one of the 3 techniques is going to work. Why do we have 3? Because the page down allows you to go frame by frame so that if the mask gets out of sync with what you have as a character, what you have selected, then you can go ahead and use the brush tool, the rotoscope and refine tools, the roto brush and the refine edge tool to clean up. So you actually are doing this 1 frame at a time. Now, that is where this becomes tedious if you follow that process, but it gives you the best results. If you want to trust on a first run, I usually trust the computer to go through with it to see what it looks like. And, you know, it's a 60-40 kind of thing for me, where 60% of the time it works out right away. The other 40% of the time I have to go back and redo. And that's usually because I make a mistake. I don't maintain my resolution at full, which you should always keep that in mind. Maintain your resolution at full when you're working with this technique. And then I just simply go back and recreate the rotoscope. You'd notice that it was fairly easy. It was just clicking. So I'm simply going to move my playback head all the way to the end over here. And you'll notice that this little bar is going to start growing momentarily. It's going to start doing the green, the little little line is growing behind it, if you notice. So I am going to wait till that is done growing. And what this is doing right now is simply retracing frame by frame the mask. So it will notice, it will calculate how the character has moved. The character that I first selected has moved throughout time, and then it'll say, okay, I need to move the mask this much. And it'll start moving it little by little until it gets to the end, to where I told it to stop. So you'll see that little green line growing. I'm going to stop for a second until it's done. Now that this is almost done, you'll notice that basically the computer is just thinking. You see these bars moving around here in this at the bottom of the preview window, and that's basically telling you the computer is calculating. Once that stops moving, it'll tell you, okay, basically I'm done. That when that disappears, that tells you, okay, everything has been masked out. So one way to test what you have created is to go back to your composition window, and you'll notice that a whole lot of effects have been applied to your footage, to the little footage. Now, if I scrub this video, nothing's going to look different because I'm looking basically at the same footage on top of the background. So if I were to place something in between these two layers, let's say a solid, let me go ahead and create a solid by pressing the keys Control and Y on the keyboard. I will create a solid, and the solid settings I'm simply going to maintain as they are. I'll click OK, and then that solid I'm going to move in between the two layers. You'll notice that I have masked out the girl, and you see the details of the hairs flying around. As I scrub the video, you'll notice that basically each frame has been masked out. You'll notice that there's some roughness around the edges, and that is because I did not apply that edge tool to the entire mask all around. I could have, but every time you do that, you increase the amount of time, the amount of rendering time that you are working with. So it's something to take into account. If you really need details, you'll see some of the little elements that show up every now and then on the animation or on the video might be eye-catching, and it might distract the viewer. So you might want to go back and rework those details by going back into your layer window, looking for that frame, and then zooming in and basically masking out those elements, which you can once you've done this. Now, when you do that, when you go back and finesse those things, all the rendering that has been done from that point on will be deleted, because obviously you just changed the mask. So you're basically telling the computer, oh, anything from this point on is useless, so I don't want to use it. And if that is the case, if that's what you're trying to do, then you probably are going to have to go and start rendering again from that point on. Same technique as before, simply place the time marker at the end of the layer, and it will just render for you. It will just continue rendering. In some computers, this will probably render only like 20 frames at a time. That is the default for computers that have very little RAM, so it will not cover the entire thing. You can go ahead and stretch that line as much as you can to see how much rendering you will get. But it's basically depending on your system and your CPU, how much actual rotoscoping can you do in one shot. For now, I'm going to maintain this as is so that I don't have to redo the entire mask again from that point on. And what I want to do now is zoom out, and before I actually do anything else, before I go back to the composition window, you need to commit that layer, that mask that you've created, to memory. You need to make sure that that is the mask that you will be using. So to do that, you do this. You click over here where it says freeze. When you click on that button, the program is basically going to say, okay, I need to freeze that mask, and what that is basically committing that mask, that matte, sorry, to the actual layer. So if I do that, the program is going to start thinking. It's going to say, okay, I need to calculate each one of those 76 frames one at a time and commit that matte so that it actually becomes the item that will be attached to the layer. And it doesn't matter what I do, it will always be there, even if I move the timeline, or if I move the clip on the timeline, or whatever I need to do to it, that will be frozen. Basically, it's almost like I'm baking that matte onto the footage. So be careful before you commit to that. Now, you can always stop it, or you can always unfreeze. So when this is done creating that mask, you have the option to unfreeze the mask in order to be able to update it or change it. So it's not like it's set in stone. You can always change it at any given time. Let me stop here again until this is done, and now I'll come back. Now that this is complete, you'll notice that the program keeps on reminding me down here that if I want to get the best results, I need to make sure that I not only keep everything in full resolution, but also if I want to fine tune any of the masking, I can always click on the freeze button again to go ahead and unfreeze what I created. But for this particular exercise, I think we're good. So let me go back to my composition and let me remove that solid. I don't want to have that solid there. What I want to have is a title that goes behind the little girl and stops on this side. That title is going to read, "Springtime is here." So I'm going to switch my tool, my tool to the text tool, and I'm going to click somewhere in the composition, and I'm going to type the word springtime. Hit return, "is here," exclamation point. And for this, I use the scripty font. You can use any font, as you know. And I want to probably increase the font size of this slightly, so I'm going to make it about 210. Let me make it 210 point. And I'm going to align it to the center, of the composition vertically. So there it is. And what this is going to do is it's going to come in from the side, go behind the girl, and stop on this side. That's the idea. So my animation will start at around 1 second, which is right here. And I am going to call my position keyframe by adding a keyframe position, which is, as you know, Command P or Alt P, Alt Shift P, Command Shift P or Alt Shift P on the keyboard. And that's my keyframe where I'm going to end. So that will happen at around 3.5 seconds. So I'm going to drag it there. And since I'm here, I'm simply going to move my title to the right-hand side, off screen. And then I'm going to fine-tune these two keyframes by going to the Graphing Editor. Now, before I do that, I need to make sure that I turn them into Bezier keyframes. And so I'm going to ease into my last keyframe, this one. And for that, I'm going to select it and press Shift F in keyframe. If you don't remember the shortcuts, you can always go to Keyframe Assistant and then press out of the flyout menu. Then let me go ahead and select both of those keyframes again and look at the chart. So with them selected, I'm going to zoom into those two, and I want to modify the curve of that shape, of the shape of my curve, so that I can go ahead and create kind of like slow in motion as it gets to the second keyframe. So to do that, I can go ahead and choose the actual keyframe and extend the influence of the rate of change versus the amount of time that is spent on the change. So if I stretch this out and I move this one in, then I'm getting the shape that I'm looking for in my animation. Remember, the higher, the more rate of change, the more pixel changes that you're seeing, the more the speed of change. Sorry. So remember, this is a time versus rate of speed of change curve. And so this is a higher rate of speed and it's going really fast. And then as it flattens out, it's going to slow down. Keep in mind that we had switched the view of our graphing editor to the speed graph. And that's what we're working with. Okay. So with that done, what I want to do is go ahead and go back to my composition, and I want to zoom out all the way. I want to make sure that I see the entire composition, and I want to activate in my switches and modes, I want to activate the motion blur. I remember that you switch between those two by clicking on this little switch down here. Since most of you are on a PC now, that would be the F4 key on the keyboard to switch between one and the other. And so if I scrub, I can see that my text is going to be blurry and it's going to be right now in front of the girl. But if I simply move my layer from the top to in between the two layers, my text is going to be between the background and the girl, and it's going to look pretty natural. It's going to look like an actual title going through because I'm seeing pieces of my title through the hair. So that makes it look fairly believable, let's call it that. So if I go ahead and click, I press my 0 key on the keyboard to create a quick preview. let's go ahead and actually let me go ahead, since I'm done with my track with my rotoscoping, I can switch my quality to half so that this renders a little bit faster, and you'll notice that the title goes between the girl and the background. You'll notice that the girl doesn't stop moving, nothing stops moving basically in the video, and you see the entire title going through, comes to a stop, and there you go. So now that we have that animation going through, let me play it back really quick. And it looks fairly believable. It looks pretty clean, actually, for just simply having clicked and created that mask without having any fine tuning. I see some items around the lips, so I can always go back and revisit that if necessary. But for all intents and purposes, this is a clean pass at just simply clicking and having applied the effect fairly quick. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to apply a filter to that title through which I make it explode when the girl blows onto the dandelions. And to do that, I'm going to use an effect called Pixel Poly. So to do that, I want to move my playback head all the way to where the dandelion falls apart, which is around here. And at that point, I want to apply that effect to be able to turn this into basically confetti that flies out. So to do that, I'll select the title layer, and I am going to filter out by looking for the effect called Pixel Poly. So if I could type Pixel Poly, it's called CC Pixel Poly. That is the name of the effect. So if I apply that to this, you'll notice that basically my title disappears. And that's because the Pixel Poly works on a timeline that is based on whenever I tell it to start over here on the actual title itself. So at this point, it starts at 0 seconds, which is over here. And right now, I am about 4 seconds and somewhere between 4 seconds and 5 seconds. So if I start increasing that by clicking and dragging to the right, notice that I clicked and dragged to the right, I automatically start seeing the confetti coming back into view. So and it falls apart around 4.75, I would say. So if I enter 4.75 in the time, that's when the whole thing starts falling apart, and that's exactly what I want to happen. That's when I want it to start. I also want to reduce the grid spacing to make my confetti slightly smaller. So if I make that around 15, that should give me the little pieces of paper that I'm looking for when the girl blows on the dandelion. I also want to reduce my gravity to 0 because I want these things to float away like the dandelion seeds that are being blown away from the top of that little stem. So if I make that 0, what's going to happen is it's just going to make everything blow away, just like if the girl was blowing the entire title away. And just to enhance the project, I am going to drop in a little soundtrack down at the bottom. And I'm probably going to import also a piece of audio of someone blowing on something. So let me go ahead and do that right now. Let's look for that file and blow. And that's a wave file, which is an audio file. And once it drops in, I'm going to drop it at the very top of the entire thing. And I'm going to press, with that layer selected, I'm going to press the L key twice, LL, really quick, to see where the sounds go. So the beginning of this is probably where the girl would go, kind of like taking in air. And then when she blows would be where I want this wave, the second sound wave, to start. So I want to move that up a little bit to about this point. So I simply just drag the layer upstream, and this should give us what we're looking for. Now you'll notice that you get that demon music because it's taking its time to render. But once it plays back completely, it's going to look fairly good. Let's take a look. All right, so that's a nice little bumper for spring, and it introduces the concept of track matting. Now, this will be one in a series of videos that I will be producing on how to mask out elements from video outside of the masks, what we saw in class for track matting and all that. That allows us to pull subjects from the videos and allows us to use those to be able to create that layering effect where we can place things in between and create different effects with them. I'll see you in the next lesson.